G'day, John. My name's Stephen Towner. I was a major in the Australian Army from 2001 to 2022 and served in Iraq, Afghanistan. And some of the units, I was a RAMI officer, so some of the units I served in were 5-7 RAR, 2 Cav, 1st Armoured Regiment, and 2nd 14th Light Horse, Queensland Mounted Infantry. I am 42 years old now. I joined the Army when I was 19, so a year after leaving high school, joined up through Duntroon in officer training. So that was 2002 that I finally joined up, and then I retired from the military in 2022.
Steve, can you tell us a little bit about what made you want to join the Army and what was your training like when you first got into the military?
Yeah, so some of the, reasons why I joined the Army was I needed obviously somewhere to belong. I came from a bit of a broken home and not the great or the best upbringing. So I think there's a lot of us that can share that commonality where you sort of go off and try and find your place in the world. And the military was just an awesome place to feed me, clothe me, be a new family for me. So that was one of the big drivers behind joining the military. That was the destiny I think that I was always, headed on. But joining the military really obviously helped me develop all the skills that I've been able to have and value now, leadership and management, working with people.
And Steve, can you share with us some of the challenges in that you arrived in the military? What did it feel like? What were the big difficulties for you when you first joined?
I think that day where you get dressed up in a suit, a shiny suit, and you've got an ironing board under one arm and a suitcase under one arm, it is a big step, I think, especially for me being 19 years old, a big step in your life where you're almost stepping away from all your comfort. But yeah, it's a huge shock to the system, and that's the way they design it. You join up, and from the minute you jump off that plane or the bus, you're getting screamed at and broken down, literally, stripped, I think, to your underwear. It was an interesting experience and something that obviously every veteran has shared. That first morning when you wake up, with your sheet over your shoulder because, the bell's been rung and you've got to go stand outside, in the middle of Canberra's winter mornings, it's quite a shock to the system, but that's what builds that character.
And Steve, can you talk about the fitness? How did they build that fitness for you?
Yeah, I mean, every day was an opportunity to build on your fitness. For the first 3 months in officer training, you are actually disconnected from the world. You go straight out to a training area called Madura, which is at the backside of the Canberra airport, bit of pine forests and scrubland. And yeah, there's not much out there. We're in little ISO huts and you really don't have many, of those creature comforts every day, running to and from everything. So you're naturally building on your fitness at every minute of the day. But yeah, it was always about that teamwork and trying to obviously build it together. For me, I was playing, football in Victoria. I felt like I was fairly fit. Obviously, there is a different level of fitness, but I definitely enjoyed it and coped fairly well. But I did have a huge, obstacle in my training. About a year into my training, playing football for the Royal Military College of Duntroon. I had a knee injury. I had an ACL rupture, so a full knee reconstruction was required. Rehab for about 8 months, and then I had to step away and join the reserves for 12 months before coming back. That really hindered my progress, both professionally, but also my fitness. To have that incident happen, playing a sport that I'd played for many years and loved, and then all of a sudden that injury, it was a huge mental, backstep. Back then, this is early 2000s, their rehab and their support was still better than probably a lot of veterans experienced in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Definitely probably better, but still pretty bad compared to even today's support and understanding what impacts it has on mental health and things like that. So eight months I was in rehab at Duntroon. I didn't mean to get injured. It was something that, innocuous injury. But that impacted me a lot. I had nowhere to go other than Duntroon. I had nowhere to fall back to. So the CO at the time of, at RMC pulled me in and said, listen, you've got two options. You either go back into training, and I wasn't quite at the running point yet. So you're either go back into training or you're medically discharged, so it was a huge kick. And I ended up saying to the CO at the time, listen, can I maybe transfer to the reserves for 12 months? So I went for 12 months to the University of New South Wales Regiment in Wollongong, where I was able to continue, and to the point where I was about to be qualified as a second lieutenant, because they still had this, but the second lieutenant sort of program where you'd go up and spend a year as a second lieutenant once you were commissioned and then get promoted to lieutenant. I did that. So I did all that training. Anyway, I got to that point where my knee was good and I was ready to continue with my career. And so I kept putting in applications. And so I think 3 applications I'd put in to rejoin RMC and continue my training. And I knew in 6 days' time they started, and I wanted to be a part of that group. I got dressed in my best polys, my best dress uniform. I drove to Canberra. I walked myself up to the director of officer career management and said, I'm Staff Cadet Towner. I'd like to report to someone here to help me. And he laughed and he said, oh, okay, I'm going to call the big boss upstairs, and literally called the colonel of Dockham. I ended up in his office and he said to me, mate, you don't do this. You don't rock up to my office and ask to rejoin the military. And I said, sir, I don't know what else to do. I was taken in a fast car around the hill. So Russell Officers is on one side of Mount Pleasant and the other side is RMC. So I was taken into RMC-A to see the director in there, and I got marched in and I got stood outside his office. His nickname was called Satan, previous Special Forces officer. Anyway, so I'm standing outside his office thinking to myself, what are you doing, you idiot? And I get frog marched in and stand on the mat, salute him. And he just starts ripping shreds off me, saying, who do you think you are, coming to, my office and asking to, rejoin RMC? Literally said to me, you don't have what it takes to be an officer. So you'll never pass here. Get the hell out of my office, with a few more expletives, involved there. So I walked back out and I stood there at attention outside of his office thinking, what's going to happen now? Anyway, a couple of minutes goes by. He invites me back in, obviously in the not so nicest of ways, screaming at me and says, listen, I'll give you an option or 2 options. One option is you rejoin in a couple of days' time, but you're not going to get any prior learning or, acknowledgement of the 12 months of training that you've had. You're going to start from the start again. So, and by this stage, I'd nearly been promoted to, second lieutenant. I'd finished all the courses, and it was just a commissioning process. So I sort of thought to myself straight away, there's no way I'm going to do this. And he said, the other option is to piss off. So yeah, definitely some good lessons in resilience, because I walked away from there thinking straight away, what am I going to do? You can guess what I did. Within about 6 days' time, I rocked up with my, again in my suit with my ironing board under my arm and my bags, and I went through that whole process again. So I'd already done 3rd class and most of 2nd class, and had to go right back and do it all again, which was interesting. I probably didn't do myself any favors at the end of that first 3-month block. One of the final things you do a lanyard parade where they present you your lanyard and invite you into the Corps of Staff Cadets. So it's a great ceremony and a great thing to achieve after that first 3 months. But what you got to do, you do a whole bunch of military activities. You got your pack on, your rifle, you've done military, skills training all day. And the last thing you do is you march across the 3 peaks next to the airport there back into Duntroon. And I was silly enough to walk past this director, because a lot of the key staff attach themselves to different sections and, do it with them for that final day. And we did overtake his section, and I sort of said to him, I haven't got what it takes, hey, and I sort of, was a bit cheeky and gave it to him and said, look at me, I've just done it again, and, and I'm going to get through this. So
in that initial training, were there any ways they used to test your fitness and that you had to meet certain requirements every week or every month or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I try and promote, obviously, joining the military for a lot of young kids that I meet. I do coaching and, support in schools and things like that. So anyone that's got any interest in the military, I try and tell them. But yeah, initially you sort of start off at a very base level. I think it's like 7.5 on the beep test. And, you've got to achieve a certain, push-ups and sit-ups and that kind of thing. But very quickly, they do want you to prove that you've got, that next level of fitness developed, especially after that first initial part. And then, yeah, you're getting tested all the time, on your running and your ability to carry heavy things and, do certain activities, do this food and sleep deprivation exercise, for 5 days where, it really tests your ability to, push through some of those really, hard tasks. You're constantly not sleeping and working, you're carrying things to the top of mountains, pushing trailers along, running to the next activity. And you do that literally for 5 days with very little, support and that kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, both times I was able to, prove my worth and be one of the, last couple of people in my section, carrying, other people through those activities. So, I'd encourage people to have a good base level before you even start, but you build on that really, really quickly. And then that continues through your whole career.
Then once you finished that core basic training, where did you go from there?
Yeah, so after that second lot of officer training, I graduated and went to 5-7 RAR, so an infantry unit as a RAMI officer. So I was a workshop platoon commander. So yeah, left, sunny Canberra for very wet and humid Darwin and, in December, January. An amazing experience and shock to the senses. I remember getting I think every flight to Darwin's a red eye, which is, middle of the night kind of flight. I land at 2 a.m. I don't know where I've got to go. I don't know who I've got to see. Who's going to pick me up from the airport? I've got no idea, but it's sort of loosely coordinated. Some poor private that's on guard duty ends up picking me up and it's pouring with rain. So I get to Robertson Barracks and try and find my room in the middle of the night. Do you think that's going to be easy when there's no one awake, no keys, no use going to sleep because I've got to report, I think at 6:30 to, the battalion. I end up getting my best set of polys ironed, not sleeping, going straight to the unit, not knowing what to expect. But the battalion was actually deployed at the time. They were on AMTG 2. So it was very much a skeleton, rear detail sort of crew that was there. So that was quite interesting, that first day. And
Steve, before you went to Iraq, was there any particular training that was done for the unit?
We did, yeah. I'll just quickly step back a step because in Duntroon, some of the guys that do the training are ex-service, corporals and privates and those kind of, guys that had a bit of experience in the military already. So I was already very in awe of, my classmates that were East Timor veterans and, really looked up to those guys for advice and support and, as role models. So where that takes me is the Army at this point were very, very good at being deployed and doing that business. So by the time I got to deploy, which was actually only a year after I graduate from Duntroon, so graduated in December 2005, 2006, I spent the year, doing some of my basic logistics course, being a RAMI officer. I managed to get on a few other courses. I got a Land Rover driver's ticket. I then actually did a MROC, which is the Mechanized Regimental Officer Basic Course, which is M113 Crew Commander on the M113 AS1. So I got qualified as a crew commander in that year as well. I did all of that. So early 2007, all of a sudden, 7 RAR got called up and was told, you're deploying back again. They'd just come back from AMTG 2 in as the headquarter element in 2006. So it was a quick turnaround, and they were being sent again. And I then got the gig, and I got to deploy. We deployed to Kaltana for I think it was 3 or 4 months. That kind of training, which is, we referred to as mission rehearsal exercises, is world class. And we went through that series of training prior to deploying. because I was an AS1 crew commander, so the M113 crew commander, what they really needed, and we didn't have enough of, was ASLAV crew commanders when we deployed. And obviously, gung-ho and wanting to do as much as I could, I put my hand up straight away. So I was sent away on a very, very quick bridging course. And then very, very soon after that, I deployed to Iraq.
Yeah, and Steve, then when you arrived in Iraq, can you talk about that? How did you feel and what was it like? So you suddenly arrived there. Can you explain the conditions and the feeling? Was a lot of apprehension?
Huge. It's funny, I've processed things more the older I've gotten, to really reflect on maybe what happened and why it happened and certain experiences that I had. But you get nominated, or put on a role of people that are deploying. But one of the main things that you do just prior to leaving is you start doing things like understanding the threat environment, understanding what you're about to walk into, so that you obviously psychologically and physically prepared. One of the things that they teach you about, and one of the biggest threats we had in Iraq at the time, was roadside bombs, IEDs. And so you go through a training package where you are out in an area and they will actually set up mock IEDs in this area, and you're expected to learn how to identify them. So to set the scene, you're walking through the desert, in Kuwait prior to stepping into Iraq. And they'll show you, you walk through this area and they'll show you, a little bit of wire sticking up is potentially a bomb. A pile of rubbish is potentially a bomb. An animal is potentially a bomb. There were so many different indicators to sort of let you know that you potentially could be going through an area of high risk if you don't identify it clearly. The problem was that when I actually deployed to Iraq, within the next few days, and I went out on my first mission, I was panicking because as we were driving along, you do a handover. So you go as a sort of a passenger in some of the armored vehicles so that the guys that are in country can sort of show you the area and show you what to expect. And I was really panicking, and I sort of said to this young corporal that I was doing a handover with, we were in an ASLAV Type 3 ambulance. And I sort of said to him, "Mate, why are we not stopping?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" And I said, "There are bombs everywhere as far as I could see. There's rubbish over there. There's the dead animal there. There's," and he said, "Sir, if we stopped every time we thought that there was a bomb, we'd never get anywhere." And it was really interesting that I had to really push down, I guess, my fear. There's a certain element where you have to just accept that you could die, that you could be going through a high risk area. And you have to just accept that the people around you are going to have your back, and they're going to look after you if you are the one that is hurt or injured. And it was just really interesting. The tactics changed a lot from when I was in Iraq to Afghanistan, where back then in Iraq, we had ASLAVs, we had Bushmasters. It was about high mobility, high, speed. It was almost like they can't really target you very well if you're getting everywhere as quick as you can. We went to the opposite tactics in Afghanistan, where we didn't go anywhere without someone walking out the front with a minesweeper. So it was lessons learnt through us driving around and getting blown up still, and the enemy, getting inside our OODA loop and being faster at being able to engage us and target us with certain, weapons and improvised explosives. That's what changed the game.
That's very much like that, because I think even with us is when you first went out, every bush, you thought you saw somebody.
Yeah, and you're worried.
Especially at night, the whole bush everything's moving for you. There's nothing you can do.
One of our tactics was just to not be in the same place twice, So, if you went out on a certain, path and mission and used a certain, way to get to where you had to go, you didn't come back that same way. It's quite funny, I one of the missions I had, taking a troop of vehicles out and for the day to this location, we had to traverse through this town. And, I pulled up to this town, probably about a K out. And, I had great cameras on my remote weapon station on my ASLAV. So, zooming in, having a look at the, you see those dynamics of the town. Are there people around, or is it deserted? Deserted usually means there's probably something wrong. Are they active? Are they using the roads? Obviously, if someone else is driving on the road, it's usually pretty good. So I thought to myself, listen, we'll probably go into town because it looks like it's, fine, but we won't come back that same way, So anyway, we drive through town, and I vividly remember driving past this guy, and he's got like a bit of a barbecue set up and this big albino donkey, sitting there. And anyway, we go out, do the mission for the day, end up coming back, and I do the same thing, and anyway, I stop short, have a look and see what's going on. Anyway, I see this big white donkey now laying on its side, people carving off stuff of it and cooking it on the barbecue. And, in our training, it's like, they can pack, dead animals full of explosives and things like that. And I'm like, nah, there's no way we're going back through that town. We're going to go right around the outside of this one. So,
Before you deployed, did
yes.
you have to do things like write your will? Because I think that was always came as quite a big shock. As 18-year-old, you have to write your will.
They do some good training in RMC where they get you to think like that. We do some really good, writing packages. I think one of the important things of an officer is being able to communicate both verbally and, in written form. So you do a lot of that education, and, they get you to write letters to, the scenario is, you're on operations and one of your soldiers has died, they've been killed in combat. You've got to write a letter to the mother. So I think that's also a great way of, I guess, exposing you to that idea. So no, it's a real eye opener. I was operating in ASLAVs. I think halfway through our deployment, we started getting some mine protection belly plates sent over from Australia. So, at that point you sort of just accepted, whatever was going to happen to you. And I think even when they came, it was a trial. It wasn't even an installation for every vehicle. So, but anyway, we did that as a workshop commander. We coordinated that. But I had bar armor on my ASLAV, which added a significant amount of weight to the vehicle, their capability, their ability to traverse, complex terrain and things like that. But that was, I guess, one of the main threats that they felt. That you could be obviously targeted with RPGs. So, I actually have some footage somewhere of the bar armor working where RPGs hit it and actually caught it. That was the design of it, either that it would impact it and explode it away from the armor, or it would actually capture it. And Bushmasters, amazing bit of kit. All those years ago, they were sort of fairly new then. As you know, they're being used in Ukraine, and they were built with a V-shaped hull to be able to take those hits. And one of the main amazing things I saw was a whole crew surviving. We got called out this one day to recover a Bushmaster that had been hit by an improvised explosive. So pretty scary, some of these improvised explosives, that they're about that big, so a good big sized dinner plate. And the technology is really basic, it's full of, an explosive compound with a concave bit of copper, mainly melted down bits of brass ammunition, and they'd melt it down, make it almost like a bowl at the front, the explosive detonator, bang, it would go out. And the way it obviously forms as a projectile is it goes out and turns into a big slug, a big molten slug. And, those things are just devastating, even for, modern tanks. So one day we did have a Bushmaster targeted and hit, and it literally gone up through one side of the, it penetrated the armor very easily, but luckily it had gone up through the V-shaped hull, hit the drive shaft, split off into two pieces, and one had come out just under the driver's butt, his seat, and one had come out one of the actual bins on the side of the vehicle. The whole vehicle got flipped onto its roof. The crew survived because of the way that those seats and, the protection that's afforded to them, they survived. They all got out, didn't, take everything out. Obviously got away from the vehicle, and it would have caught on, or it did catch on fire. It would have exploded. There's, grenades in there and ammunition and all kinds of things. One of my tasks was to go out. We had to recover that and bring it back, and obviously go through that whole process of making sure that it was, stripped of anything, that was, crypto radios and, weapons. And amazing to see that the protection it afforded our soldiers. And, all those guys, like you said, probably were affected by it, but lived to tell the story, and walked away, which was just quite amazing. We had to literally we couldn't get it off the road. It had melted to a road. had to get a crane to peel it off the road and put it on a low loader to return it. We couldn't pick it up and recover it with any of our heavy vehicles. So it was quite a crazy thing to see, but so happy that those guys survived.
And Steve, when the guys did patrol, did they go out on patrol and then come back and sleep in the forward base, or did they go out on patrol and just camp and then move on?
Yeah, bit of both. Not as much of the second one. We were on Overwatch Battle Group West number 3, so it was the last tour that we had based out of Talil in southern Iraq, and the government was winding the commitment down as far as what were we doing and how far were we reaching, and the kind of missions that we had, were being curtailed a little bit towards the end. And so, there was a little bit of that, but not as much. I mean, I had a few nights where I literally slept in a spare tire on the top of an ASLAV, or, you're on gun picket all night, or, one night it's so hot, you're just sort of sleeping on the ground, just, because it was the coolest place to be. Oh, no, definitely, exercises that I've been involved in. Yeah, we do very similar, things, sleeping in the bush. But yeah, the desert was just a totally different environment again. And, to be honest with you, being on operations, you usually wouldn't be out for more than 1 or 2 nights, or the experiences I had. I just didn't really sleep much anyway. So I was a bit worried about what was going on. We had one night where we had to do a cordon around a Black Hawk that had actually crashed in the desert. So we had to go out, find it. Yeah, I didn't get much sleep that night, but very early hours in the morning, a big Merlin. Merlin's almost like the British sort of Chinook equivalent, massive, helicopter, and it came in and underslung the Black Hawk and then flew off back to Basra. They were a British group. That was quite a sight to sort of see in the early hours of the morning. But
going on to Afghanistan, you spoke a little bit about your tactics being slightly different.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I won't profess to say that this is firsthand. I wasn't in armored vehicles when I was in Afghanistan. I was in a different role. I was in what they called the Brigade Advisory Team. So we were embedded into the Afghani, units where we would do one-on-one liaison and trying to help them build their army and build their capability. So that was my role, very different role for me. I wasn't doing logistics and wasn't, doing the maintenance and workshop commanding stuff and a lot of, commanding armored vehicles and doing different recoveries and missions. I was instead, in this other advisory role, almost like the Vietnam training teams, where we went in every day to liaise and work with these guys. Totally different stress again, to be honest with you, because this was, in the years preceding a lot of those blue-on-blue attacks, which were where our soldiers were living and working with these guys embedded side by side, and there was a lot of insider Afghani, people targeting our guys, shooting them in their sleep, shooting them when they're having a cards game. That's where a lot of our soldiers, died in Afghanistan from those blue-on-blue attacks. So that was really, I guess, scary, because every day you were in amongst that in a really, really small group. So because we were at a point where they were hoping that, they trusted us, we trusted them. And it was interesting that every day when I went over to go and engage with the Afghanis, because they're in a separate base, we would have what we call guardian angels with us, which were, infantrymen or armored men, armor crewmen that were geared up. So helmet, body armor, rifle, and they were supposed to be our guardian angels. We were trying to show that we were trusting of them. So I would go in with bush hat, my cam shirt, a pistol. That's it. That was my protection, was that I was hoping that they would, not shoot me. The problem was I'm 6'2". Every guardian angel I ever inherited was about 4'2". So I'd usually say to them at the start of the day when we would do some rehearsals and prep, I'd say, listen, mate, if stuff goes down, I'm going to literally scoop my arm in behind your ballistic armor, lift you up and use you as a shield and, take your rifle off you, And I said, we'll get both of us out together. So that was the laugh that I'd have with them and say, at the end of the day, it was quite confronting to go in and be clean skinned, knowing that, we'd lost a lot of our, soldiers through that blue on blue.
And how did it make you feel? What did you feel it was right that the army was putting you in that sort of position?
Listen, it was an amazing thing at the time to see where we'd progressed because obviously, again, I was at the tail end of our commitment. So we were the last. So I was with 2 Cav Regiment for this deployment to Afghanistan as the headquarter unit, and we were under them, working with them. And again, it was one of the last ones, the major commitment that we had there at the time. And our task group was winding down. We were the last ones to sort of leave Talil and start taking equipment out and things like that. And so it was interesting. Again, the government was really winding down what risk, level they were willing to accept. They didn't want any more soldiers to be targeted. So yeah, it was interesting. We're a little bit like tethered goats because we still had a job to do. But yeah, the thing I'm getting at was it was quite rewarding still because we'd been there for a number of years. And some of the final things that I was helping with was we were commissioning a $75 million facility that we were handing over to them. And they were able to then take over their own workshop and their own barracks areas and their own, capability. And we were growing that. So it was quite rewarding to see that transition happen. Obviously, we all know what happened soon after that, where when America and, when we'd left as well, it all got turned over to the Taliban. You start thinking, well, what was it worth? Was it worth it, what we did, the lives that were lost, the commitment we had? But at the time, I really believed in what we were doing and we were helping people, look after themselves and be a country that they could be proud of themselves. That was quite rewarding.
And then, Steve, once you came back, how did you feel? Did you ever think back and be concerned about where you might have been in harm's way? Or because a lot of guys, once they get back, it starts to eat at them in their minds that about what happened and why it happened.
As a veteran, you're always processing this still. For even people that haven't deployed, even people that haven't been on operations, there is elements of, giving yourself to an organization like the military where it changes who you are and, you give so much of yourself away at what reward a lot of the time, and for me, like I told you, I didn't have anything to fall back on. I didn't have anything to start with. So it was a big thing for me to try and make it work and to be the best I could be. So almost like 110% in, that's the way I looked at it. So I'll be honest with you, that I guess to deploy and be under so much pressure, I did come back from that deployment changed and not for the better, and I think for many years, like that was 2007, I don't think until 2013 I even realized what impact it had on me physically and mentally. I had a bit of a breakdown, which I'll happily admit to you, and to the audience, but had a breakdown at the end of 2013. And I had this moment where we'd moved to Albury-Wodonga and I'm unpacking boxes in our new house we'd just moved into. We've got a 1-year-old and I end up having this moment where I collapse. And I collapse and, she rushes me to hospital and, I start getting checks and they're like, we can't actually find anything specifically wrong with you, but we can tell that there's something wrong. What is it? And I'm like, I don't know. Because I think that's what we do as veterans and men. We just push everything down and, we don't try and deal with anything. You go, oh, that's okay. And, and I definitely changed. Like I said, I was more angry and I was more moody and I was more, I guess, snappy and all these different things because I wasn't dealing with anything that had affected me in that high stress environment. And I'd carried it on all these years and I'd always trying to do my best. And, what that looked like would be that at work, I'm professional and everything's great, but at home, I'm not okay, and that was the image that you'd put out there for yourself because you want to do better and all that kind of thing. I then have to go see a psychologist. The first time I actually spoke to someone and started realizing that, wait a second, I think I'm still having some effects of all that stress I had, years prior. And I think a lot of veterans can relate that sometimes that stress just never goes away, no matter I mean, for me, alcohol was the only thing that would, I guess, subdue it a little bit, soften it a little bit. And, it really bad to the point where a couple of years ago, not an alcoholic, but alcohol dependent, and really needing that alcohol to get through every moment and not every moment of the day, but, definitely at the end of the day, and, not a great healthy way to live. So, yeah, really interesting to reflect and to learn from it and hopefully help a few people realize that they're not alone.
Now, Steve, you dealt with interpreters and a lot of support people while you were in Iraq and Afghanistan. Have you ever kept in contact with those people, or what happened once you had left?
In Afghanistan, I was side by side in that same instance where I had a guardian angel. I had my own interpreter, a really great guy. And you obviously build really good, strong relationships with people like that. And yeah, when we got back, because like I said, we were one of the last task groups. What they started doing was actually bringing back a lot of those interpreters and offering them, support to come to Australia to, immigrate and citizenships and things like that. My interpreter got to come back to Australia, which was, amazing. And we kept in contact and we still do. The really sad part, though, for me was, a couple of years ago when America finally pulled out of being, in Kabul, and we saw on the news, we all saw live, what was happening and that stress and of the Taliban, targeting people and the pressure. I got contacted by my interpreter and he said, listen, my brother has been targeted by the Taliban now. Can we help him get out of Afghanistan and bring him here? And I'd retired by this point. I'd just finished up. I actually ended up contacting my CO that I had from when I was in Afghanistan and said to him, hey, this is a situation, but definitely helped me guide, my interpreter's family. We got them to a position where they were about to get on a flight out of Kabul and they could not go through the process because the young boy didn't have any paperwork for passports or, whatever, and they couldn't leave Kabul. And it actually got to that point where, I was obviously really affected by this. And this is only a couple of years ago. I almost had to just distance myself from the process because I'd done everything I could to that point of, other than me going over there and trying to do something myself, I'd coordinated, I'd helped, I'd supported, I'd, reinforced things. I'd contacted people all throughout the military in Australia, and there wasn't much else I could do at that point. So I sort of had to just, switch off my phone. So yeah, really, really horrible, what they had to go through as a family purely because this guy helped us out as Australians. It was sad.
Steve, now that you've finished in the military, what are your next steps? Where to from here? And you spent 4 or 5 years since you retired. What
Yes.
advice would you give to anyone else? Because unfortunately, in the military, you can't, as you say, your body never can't hold out forever.
Yes.
And guys normally will retire in that maybe 40 to 50 age group. What advice do you have for them?
I think every day I'm still trying to be the best version of myself. I've definitely gone through some big steps of realizing or admitting that I've got problems, even admitting to friends and family for the first time that I've suffered a bit, and maybe that's, I could be a better version of myself is where I'm at. When I was in the military, I almost felt like you never had time for yourself, because I was giving so much of myself that, your family was affected and, you compromise on your own health and your fitness, and you're not listening to yourself because you're just trying to do the best you can for everyone else a lot of the time. So for me, since I've been out, I probably thought straight away, great, I'm going to finally have some time for myself and pursue the other things in my life that I'm interested in. What ended up happening was I think I got a bit lost for those first couple of years in that. I started doing a lot of other things. Initially, I actually thought, I'm a service guy. I just need to go and do more service things. So I started helping here and running this and trying to get this job and, all different things that didn't end up actually helping me still. I started just doing the same behavior. So in the last couple of years, I've really worked on my own personal development. I've been doing some training. I've been doing some courses. I've been working on my health. And I've actually got to a point where I realized that what I needed was a little bit of purpose. I needed a bit of routine. One thing that you do after, so long in the military is you're so used to routine. And I think sometimes when you leave the military, you've got all this opportunity to do whatever you want, but because you don't have a routine as such, you end up losing your way a little bit. So what I've had to do in the last year is just go back to almost, everyone will know this as a veteran, you had a daily rhythm, like a timetable, report here to see, Sergeant Major X, then go here and do PT and then go do, I've actually got that. So if you look at my calendar now, it's a little bit of holding myself accountable. And what that's done is mentally and physically helped me a lot. And it's probably my one bit of advice for a lot of those veterans that might be suffering is almost go back to creating a really, really strong routine. And that will give you purpose. Even if it's to the point where it says, you are supposed to be here and doing this at this point, at least if you can't or you don't want to, at least you had the option of doing that. And you might go, nah, that doesn't suit me right at this moment in time. That's okay, because that's you owning your life and routine again. So the next steps for me is I've started helping my wife launch a new brand. So hence wearing this today, Vortrekker. South Africa knows what that means, but yeah, we're launching an e-commerce brand, helping her launch that. It's a camping bag, a duffel bag. So that's something that I've really helped her do, and that's what I'm investing myself into a bit as well to try and launch that. So learning all different elements of doing social media and helping her create a brand and going on a journey, and that's to help her transition out of what she's doing to give her something that she really feels passionate about. So that's the journey that I'm on at the moment as well, just helping her do that in that digital space.
And Steve, how are you using your old military experience to develop your product? How have you found that as your military background, how you, in the way you've approached and decided what product to market?
I think, on this journey, some of the training that I'm doing and my wife is doing that, it's about trying to find a niche. And, for us, we like our camping, we like our four-wheel driving and getting out. I think every army guy or military guy has that relationship with being free and being out in the elements and things like that. It's something that we are drawn to. So that helped me develop the niche and look at what we're doing. What I've been able to do is help my wife understand, I'm a bit OCD. When we pack the car, she doesn't even try and help me. I'm the Tetris king. You find a place for everything. Very much like an armored vehicle. Like I said, I think earlier, an armored vehicle has a place for everything inside of it. It's very organized because you can't have that chaos when you're fighting a vehicle. We've designed our product, our bag, to be a representative of that, or use at least those skills that I've got to understand that everything should have a place. I've got a place for where my t-shirts are, my shorts, my heavy gear, my torch, my toiletry bag is a Velcro on and off. The lid stays up when it's in the vehicle to be able to access everything. So yeah, definitely using that. Resilience is a big factor. Don't give up. They talk about in e-commerce, there's always a valley of despair. You're good, and then you go down, 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 you hit a hurdle and you think, oh, I can never get out of this valley, So that's another part where you just go, yeah, of course I can get out of it. You just got to solve it in another way.
As we used to always say in the military, as long as no one's dead, you're okay.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. I think veterans, you tell a warrior or two, a war story. This one day I get tapped on the shoulder and asked, do you want to go from southern Iraq and go on this mission up in near Baghdad? Our job was to embed in an Iraqi battalion that was training to then go and fight in Baghdad. So they're on the outskirts of Baghdad near a place called FOB Hammer. And they said, you're going to go up there and do some armored vehicle training, weapons, heavy weapons training with this, battalion of guys. And anyway, we jump on a Hercules, fly up, land in Baghdad, get off. And it was pretty much told to us that at any point you could get put on the helicopter and sent off, just hang around, and hurry up and wait. Anyway, it's probably about 11, maybe 12 o'clock at night. We're just still waiting. Don't know when that helicopter's coming to take us. So what do? I do the opposite of what you should. I start taking my pack apart. Sure enough, as I pull the last item out, they say you have 2 minutes to get on the helicopter. So I'm like shoving everything in, like a madman, So I pack my pack again. You flip it over your head because it's so heavy, and you pick up your rifle, and I stand up and I look down And the only thing I haven't packed, because the bag was sitting on it, is my set of Billabong thongs, right? And these things are priceless in a place like Iraq because it's filthy wherever you shower. Or I pick them up and put them under my arm, race out to this helicopter. And anyway, you take your pack off, hand it to the loadmaster, and I've got my rifle and I've got these set of thongs. And I'm like, fuck, what do I do? So thinking, I'll just sort of use one of the straps and loop it through both the thongs. As soon as we take off and start flying, people start shooting at us, So there's tracer rounds going past, and I think an RPG went past. So the door gunner's, he's on one side, down, and it was just one door gunner, but two Mag 58s on each side, like slung. So he would go as the helicopter would, pitch up one way. He'd switch around in his chair, fire, 50 rounds at wherever the perceived enemy was in the desert. And then as we'd pitch the other way, he'd flip around and go the other side. The one thing that you can't do is anything, because you're just along for the ride at this point. Like, you're strapped in, you can't fire your rifle out, you're not doing anything, you're letting the pilot and the door gunner do their business. There's flares going off everywhere. And one of the times we pitched up, I see the strap come undone, and I see one of my thongs go tumbling out of the side of the helicopter into the darkness of the desert. And I just thought at that moment, I thought, you know what? I've lost it. I grabbed the other thong off the bag and I went, fuck you, Iraq, and just threw it out the side of the helicopter. And hope it insightful and, encourages some more younger veterans to, join your interviews and hopefully I can help as well, getting a few people to talk to.
They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.